Okay, so once again, good morning. This is a session with the goal of trying to clarify for employees in the organization a little bit about the Families First Coronavirus Act and the emergency leave time provisions that were created when that act came into being back in, I believe it was March. So I am going to put a couple of links into the chat. I'll probably have to do that a couple of times based on when people join. The first link I'm pasting into the chat is to the HR office's website, and a page within that I've devoted to school reopening information. It's a page that's under construction still, but some of the information that I'm going to talk about today is included in that on that page. The second link I'm going to put in is a link to one of our policies, one of the school district policies, and that policy is the FMLA policy. And as I've had discussions with people over the past couple of months, it occurs to me that not everyone's familiar with the Family Medical Leave Act of 1993 or the school district policy that's associated with it, because that does factor into this particular situation. So where to start? The FFCRA was an attempt, it's Federal Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act, and includes the Federal Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act, and it includes the Federal Emergency FMLA Expansion Act. And those two pieces together attempted to provide a safety net for employees in the face of the pandemic, in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. And essentially what it did was set forth a series of conditions that allow for the use or require employers to award paid leave for conditions associated with the pandemic. So what I'm going to do right now is to project my screen and show a document that our law firm, one of the firms we work with, Bond, Shenick and King, did that I think does a reasonable job summarizing this leave. And at the end, toward the end, I will make this document available to you as a resource going forward. This basically summarizes the pieces I just talked about, the Federal Emergency Paid Sick Leave and the Federal Emergency FMLA. But it also includes the New York State Paid Emergency Sick Leave Law as well. So there is a state component to this. So here I go. I'm going to share my screen. Bear with me for a second. And hopefully you'll all be able to see this particular screen. So the first thing to note is that these particular provisions at the federal level are set to expire on December 31st, 2020. Now, we don't know what Congress will do, whether they'll extend this or not. But for right now, what I'm talking about on the federal level only goes through the remainder of this calendar year. So just please keep that in mind sort of first and foremost. And I'm going to start on the right side of this document because the pieces on the right side here are the expanded reasons for leave that the law put into place. There certainly were any of our employees who are in a collective bargaining unit, you have allowable reasons for sick leave and personal leave that are extended to you as a result of being an employee in the district and having collectively bargained for those things. But none of those anticipated a global pandemic. And so the federal government, and that's probably true universally, so the federal government took on this particular thing. So I'm actually going to start on the right and kind of work my way left and just sort of explain this. So the emergency paid sick leave first creates these six new categories of allowable leave. So first, if an employee is under a federal, state, or local quarantine or isolation order related to COVID, that employee qualifies for emergency paid sick leave. And the emergency leave is supposed to be awarded beyond or in addition to your regular allowed accruals. Second reason is an employee has been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine due to COVID-19. The third reason would be you're experiencing symptoms of COVID-19 and seeking a medical diagnosis. Now, of course, those first three reasons all speak to the desire to reduce community spread of the virus. They're strategies to keep people away from other people, right? Hopefully that makes sense. When they're worried that there's a reason to be worried. The fourth reason, and we'll spend a little more time on these in detail, is if you need to care for an individual under a mandated quarantine or isolation order, or who's been advised to self-quarantine by a healthcare provider. So we see a shift here. The first three reasons would be you, the employee yourself, but the fourth reason shifts to where you're responsible for, basically for a loved one that you have to take care of, and they cannot leave the house because they're under a quarantine. The fifth reason is if you need to care for your child because the school or daycare is closed as a result of COVID-19, or your paid childcare provider is unavailable as a result of COVID-19. Now, this is where we're forging into new territory because, of course, so many of our schools, including Scarsdale schools, are operating on a hybrid schedule, which essentially means for some children on some days or some parts of days, school is closed. They're not going to school 5 days a week, just as our students are. And the sixth reason is sort of a field of rampant speculation amongst HR people around the country. We don't exactly know what this means, but the employee is experiencing any other substantially similar condition specified by designated federal officials. Not really sure what to make of that one. That's a harder one to pin down. You'll notice an exception in a couple places where an employer can exempt employees who are healthcare providers or emergency responders from being eligible for this benefit. That was really at the time when we were in deep crisis and healthcare facilities were totally overwhelmed, and it largely doesn't apply to us as a school district. So for anyone who falls into these categories, this explains what is available in terms of this benefit. So all employees are eligible. There's a differentiation between full-time and part-time employees about receipt of this benefit. So for full-time employees, it's up to 80 hours of benefit of emergency paid sick leave. And that functionally is two weeks, 2 40-hour work weeks is basically what that is. For part-time employees, it's the average number of hours worked over a 2-week period. So if you're a 25-hour employee over 2 weeks, that would be a 50-hour benefit, 50 hours of paid time, or functionally two paid weeks if that's your time. And this leave is paid at a particular rate. And that rate is differentiated, and it's differentiated by reason. So you'll recall those first three reasons were really centered on you, the employee, being the one experiencing COVID, isolation, quarantine, or symptoms. And in those instances, the rate of pay for that leave is a maximum of $511 a day. It's your rate of pay, up to $511 a day, and a $5,110 aggregate total. So you'll see that's 10 days, basically, 10 full days of pay. Now we have determined to be able to use that benefit plus supplement that with your own accruals to get a full day's rate of pay if that doesn't meet that rate of pay. So we could use a part of a sick day to make that up. For reasons 4, 5, and 6, the law limits that pay to 2/3 of the regular rate of pay, maximum $200 a day, and a $2,000 aggregate total. So that's what the law calls for. But we must allow you to use other accrued paid time off before using that sick time available, if that's what you choose to do. And that's why, as I said, if you wanted to supplement that with partial use of your accruals to get your full rate of pay, we're able to do that. Okay, before I take questions, I'm going to go through all three of these and then shift to questions. Now, the second category here, moving right to left, is the Federal Emergency FMLA Expansion Act. Now, I want to remind you, and I'm actually going to go to the FMLA policy of what FMLA is. I just want to make sure people understand what it is, and then what has been expanded. So this is, I've just shifted here to our policy. This is the FMLA policy that conforms with the law. And the FMLA covers eligible full-time and part-time employees. And FMLA is available once in a 12-month period for up to 12 weeks. FMLA is structured around being an unpaid leave of absence. Okay, so normally FMLA is an unpaid absence. And employees are eligible for FMLA for up to 12 weeks of FMLA for these 5 reasons: birth of a child or care of an infant, adoption of a child or care for the infant, placement with the employee of a child in foster care, care for a spouse, child, or parent who has a serious health condition, and a serious health condition of the employee themselves. Now, you heard me say that this is an unpaid leave, but that doesn't preclude you from being able to apply your own sick leave benefits. And in fact, in many instances, sick leave for a serious health condition that you have can possibly exceed the 12-week duration. So what I'm saying is, this is a federal law that supplies a minimum amount of time off, unpaid, with job security and continuation of health benefits if you receive them from the employer. That's not to say our own contracts with individual groups of you in the district don't exceed that benefit. And in fact, when we're talking about the birth of a child, there is the allowance of the use of disability sick time for a period of time after that birth. So sometime, the short version is sometimes the period of FMLA already before the emergency legislation could include the use of paid time off. Okay? Now I'm going to go back to this COVID specific document. What the expansion of FMLA did was to add a reason to that list that I just said, and add a requirement of pay to FMLA. So keep in mind, FMLA is unpaid normally, but the federal government expanded the FMLA law temporarily through the end of this calendar year to include a reason that's not normally in the law and to include the requirement of some pay for that leave. So now I'm going to go into that reason and that pay. So the reason is, the new reason to be able to be eligible for FMLA, the expansion, is if an employee is unable to work or telework because he or she needs to care for his own child under the age of 18 due to the fact that the child's school or daycare is closed as a result of COVID-19, or due to the paid childcare provider for that child being unavailable as a result of COVID-19. So basically, it's reason 5 over here on the Sick Leave Act has been added to the FMLA expansion. Now, the way it works in terms of the pay piece of it is any employee employed for 30 days or more, it's 12 weeks as per FMLA. The first 10 days are unpaid of this leave. Why? Because the emergency sick leave provision covers those first 10 days. So for the first 10 days of this FMLA, you'd be falling under reason 5 of the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act. The amount of pay falls under the 2/3 rule. So it's $200 a day, max 10,000 aggregate total. And again, coupled with the emergency sick leave, that would be max $12,000 total. The employee can elect to use accruals concurrently to supplement pay available under the law. So you could use your sick accruals to bump that $200 a day up to your normal rate of pay if your rate of pay exceeds that. So that's what the law calls for. Finally, New York's expansion of paid sick leave really kind of dovetails with this. And it basically says if you are sick for one of the reasons set forth under the Department of Health mandated order of quarantine or precautionary isolation, it actually gives you 14 calendar days or 2 weeks. So it really dovetails with the federal law. The difference is it's above and beyond any paid time off. PTO stands for paid time off, by the way. It goes above and beyond any paid time off that you would normally be eligible for. That's really the differentiation between the state implementation of this and the federal implementation. Okay? So it's really about you are under quarantine or precautionary isolation by the Department of Health. It can't be charged against your regular accruals. The exception to this, of course, is that New York State has a travel advisory that has a list of restricted states. If you make the election to go to one of those states and are mandated to have a quarantine as a result of your return and you can't work, you are not eligible for New York State paid time off on that regard because you've made the choice to go to that restricted state. So those are really, really the pieces. So one of the sets of cases or sets of questions, a universe of questions that we're starting to get now that the picture of school opening is becoming more clear, not just in Scarsdale, but throughout the region, is particularly around the use of expanded FMLA. And can people use that time? Are are they eligible? And the answer is, of course, if the reason is because your child's school or daycare is closed, then yes, you're eligible to use this time. Initially, when this expanded law was passed, it was passed around the idea that you had to use the time consecutively, meaning you could take 12 weeks, but it had to be 12 weeks concurrently, every day of work for those 12 weeks. There was a lawsuit brought against the federal government against this, and a couple of weeks ago, a district court ruled that that cannot be a requirement, that the federal law, the regular law, which allows for intermittent leave, meaning time increments up to or as small as an hour a day, 1 hour increments can be used in an intermittent fashion for FMLA under this emergency provision. Okay, so it does not have to be used at 12-week shot concurrently. It can be used on a day here, a day there, provided that the reason is a child's school or daycare is closed, or the child, due to COVID-19, or the child care provider is unavailable. So that's my spiel. Took about 20 minutes. I'm going to pause and hopefully devote the rest of this time to the ability to answer questions. Please use the raise your hand function, which is found in the participant icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And I will call on you based on the ability to raise your hand. Okay, Kim O'Connor.
Hi, Drew. Do you have to take the Family Medical Leave Act for daycare prior to December 31st, or could it start before December 31st and roll over into January?
This reason, the leave has been expanded to include this as a reason for FMLA. That's not normally a reason, and it ends December 31st. So the benefit ends December 31st. It doesn't roll over as of right now unless something changes in the legislation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Zulmira, you got to unmute. There you go.
I qualify on the first column. I qualify for an accommodation, all right, based on what my doctor advised me. I don't want to use this accommodation because if I use this accommodation, I will be placed in a different teaching position that it's not the one I am looking forward to do it.
Okay.
So my question is,
I need to interrupt you for a second. So this is not about accommodations under the Americans with Disabilities Act. This is about paid sick leave. And the reasons set forth here are related to a specific COVID-19 diagnosis and self-quarantine.
Okay.
It's not about the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Okay, sorry.
Are you good? You want to follow up? You're good? Okay. Joe Vaughn?
Hi, could you speak to how this intersects with normal FMLA so that people are aware of if they take this time, that if they need to take time later in the year, for example, for a childbirth or something, how that would intersect?
Yeah, so my current understanding is that this expansion of the FMLA follows the same set of rules. It's basically the same 12 weeks. I do want to gain clarity on that though.
Mm-hmm.
And I would encourage people who kind of fall into that category to talk to me on a case-by-case basis.
Great. And just as a second follow-up then, for some of our employees whose daily rate is higher than $511, would it make more sense for them just to take a sick day rather than access benefits under FFCRA for reasons 1, 2, and 3?
Yeah, I think those issues that's a really good question. I will say unequivocally from a record keeping standpoint, that would be way easier for us than using those and trying to do a partial accounting of the use of a partial sick day. However, they do have the right to do either.
Right. I just wanted to raise that issue because for some people who might have like 180 days of accrued sick time, but since this benefit has those implications of impacting FMLA you could take later when we don't know what's going to happen later.
That's right.
I just wanted to make sure that people are reserving or using their resources to the best distribution that's available to them.
Right. That's a good point. And just to be clear, if you're reason 5 on the list, which was you need to care for a child because your child's school closed, certainly the first 10 days of that could be taken under your own sick time and not touch FMLA time whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
However, by doing so, you're not eligible for the intermittent nature at that hourly level or so on. Our sick days are set as half day or full day.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Right. And normally sick days are not eligible to take care of children. That's what personal days are for. This is just something very specific to this extension of the law, right, Drew?
Temporary and yes, specific to this law. It's our contract, which does not allow the use of sick time for this purpose, cannot break the law.
Right.
Therefore, we have to follow the law, and we have a new reason temporarily to use sick time.
Thank you for those.
Thank you. Good question. Amanda.
Hi, Drew. I have sort of a two-part question. And I hope I know the answer to the first part, but I'm going to ask it just for anyone else who might have this concern. Can students who are children of faculty members still attend Scarsdale schools if the parent has elected to go on a leave under FMLA? That's the first part.
Yes, FMLA continues the relationship between the employee and the employer for that 12-week period.
Okay.
In other words, you're not on a full year unpaid leave of absence. You're still functionally a full-time employee. You're just taking advantage of the ability to have a leave.
The follow-up question was a few weeks ago, you sent out a survey about the JCC, which was offering wraparound childcare or considering offering
Yes.
wraparound childcare. Part of my decision about whether or not to use the FMLA benefit would be contingent on securing childcare, near school for my child. So I'm wondering if there's been any word or follow-up from the JCC.
Thank you for asking that question. I met with the JCC team for an hour yesterday afternoon and discussed where we are, where they are. We know we're releasing our class assignments, for our elementary kids and so on Monday, August 31st. And their intention is to try to coordinate with that moment once parents and employees, teachers here and so forth, know more information about their children's day, then they think they can move toward registration. There are a couple of open questions, and one of them is transportation. And we started exploring, and I hope to know more today. Can't guarantee it, about whether we would be able to be providing transportation to that location from our schools at the end of the AM block from elementary and reversing from to the school for the start of the PM block. So we're exploring that today.
Can I ask just one related follow-up question,
Sure.
which is there any word on transportation between schools? So in other words, there used to be transportation provided from the high school to the elementary schools, busing for faculty, students, and now, several years ago, that was taken away. I'm wondering if there will be any restitution of, transportation from, say, the high school, which starts earlier than the elementary schools, so that, my kid could get picked up at the high school. I'm sorry if that's too specific.
No, that I don't have an answer to that question, but I will take it to the team.
Okay,
I
thank
just
you.
wrote it, I just wrote it down. Thank you. Okay, Elise.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
So being that a lot of the stuff seems like it might be last minute because of changes both, in a home district, a personal, kind of juggling around, and also obviously our responsibility for the job. What if there are kind of last minute requests for this type of leave, like an intermittent or whatever type of leave, and it's in process or not answered or approved, by the time school starts? Would it be advised that we take a personal or sick day while this is being worked out, or should we assume that when we send a request, we'll get a turnaround within a shorter period of time? Kind of looking at that timeline for that. And related to that also, if the schedule kind of changes or is tweaked throughout the month or months that we take a leave, what's the process kind of with the communication and who's tracking those changes? Or does that kind of have to be refreshed every time that there might be a change with a different letter or note back to HR?
I think I understand your second question, but I might need to probe a little further. But in terms of the first question, our attempt will be to turn those around very quickly. I have been inundated with ADA requests, and those are complex and difficult to turn around. I might be shooting myself in the foot, but I don't see why these would be complex. The letter of the law is pretty clear. The eligibility is clear. So I think we don't really have a choice about whether to decide to grant it or not. If the conditions are met, it's granted. So I think I should be able to turn it around very, very quickly. In terms of if what you're asking in the second part of your question is, as your conditions change, I think that's what I'm hearing, not the school districts.
Well, so like two of my kids are going to Scarsdale, and I have another kid, for example, in the pre-K. So we're talking about potentially 3 different, and my husband's district too, 4 different school districts. So I'm just thinking that if, like, for example, if the elementary is home twice a week on Wednesdays and we're not, every week might look different. How do we lay those things out in a letter? Are we just very detailed with what we know at this point if we do
Yes.
decide to take a leave, and then just update that letter as things change?
Yes, and let's be clear of what the purpose of that information is. If a employee, an educator, a teacher aide, whatever, is not going to be present at work, we need to know when, so we can cover for that group of students if it's an instructional position. So regardless, we need to know. What we can't have are surprises where kids are showing up in an instructional space and there's no adult there. So
Yeah.
the purpose is good communication.
Right. So I guess what I'm saying, because, there's all these things that pop up, unfortunately last minute, like a group might have to go into quarantine or a situation might change. I guess want to have the understanding that does it have to be a formal letter back to HR making a different request because the situation changed, or will an email suffice?
An email will
Or do we-
suffice.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Robin. I don't see a last
Hi,
name.
Drew. Can you
Hi.
hear me?
Yep.
Okay, hi. My question is, if an employee is taking EPSLA and is only entitled to 3/4 of their pay, and they decide to supplement, would those supplemental increments of time be deducted from the 80 hours they're entitled to, or would that be separate and apart from the 80 hours?
So first of all, it wouldn't be 3/4 pay is not one of the factors.
Oh, 2/3, I'm sorry, 2/3.
Okay. So if what you're using is your own accruals to supplement the 2/3, then that does not impact the 80 hours.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. My very own Deirdre Reed. You're muted.
You actually answered my questions since I put my hand up, and any other questions, I'm going to have a few, so I'm going to write them down and you and I can meet.
Great. Perfect.
Okay?
Yes.
All right.
And just for everyone's benefit, Deirdre will be the one primarily responsible for tracking all of this. So she has a very important stake in this conversation.
Yeah, the other question I had, I thought everybody would be interested in the answer. That's why I put my hand up, but you already answered it, so
Okay, great.
we're good.
Fran.
Drew, when I had my meeting yesterday with my group, it came up, what if a secretary is exposed more than once and has to quarantine more than once? Are they entitled to the 2 weeks of paid leave without going into their own personal account? Or would they only be able to get 1 2-week period and then the rest would have to be used with their own personal time off?
Right. So if we're talking about quarantine due to exposure, right? And it's not related to the travel advisory, it's something local or,
No, we're more concerned with it being exposed during work.
Sure. So I think where we are with that is that's where we perhaps would rely on our sick bank.
Okay.
To if it was a second go round to talk in dialogue to perhaps use the sick bank.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Good question. Thank you.
Excuse me,
Right.
Andrew.
David Sharon.
Hi, Drew. Thank you. Just in terms of the meaning of kind of a daycare being closed, or the provider being unavailable. So the daycare that we previously used is no longer running a program for 2-year-olds, right? But as you can maybe hear in the background, I have a 2-year-old. So does that count as a daycare being closed if they've kind of ended the program for the 2-year-olds because of COVID? And does an email from them suffice? Thanks.
Obviously we would appreciate the effort of trying to find an alternate provider. This was enacted when basically all providers were closed. But we know there's stiff competition and challenge and different levels of safety that are being provided. So I think we have to accept that letter that you just described that might come from the closed daycare at this point in time, until such time as it becomes much more widely available, I would say. I'm going to go back to Joe Vaughn.
So in terms of just mechanisms here, is this going to be something that's under ASOP, that there'll be a new drop down for taking leave under FFCRA? That's my first question.
So right now we are using a process right now that leans on supervisors to let us know. So first of all, let me go back and say we have 2 systems of tracking accruals. So some of our employees use Frontline ASOP, but many of our employees use something called Time Clock Plus. So just so everyone knows, whatever your system is, that the question applies to that. We are using a process right now that leans on the approver of those systems to fill out a form. It's actually on the website, the HR website I linked in, to sort of track that separately, and then Deirdre is going to be working to code that properly. So at this point in time, am I right about that, Deirdre? Have we added a code into? You're muted.
Yes, it will be a code in ASAP, but I think we decided that the employee wouldn't be the one that would choose that,
Yeah.
correct?
So we've told employers, if that's the reason for people's leave, that we would code that. They would complete a survey in Google Forms and we would code it appropriately.
Someone asked a question earlier about if it was something, if they're doing it intermittently and say they don't know until the night before or something like that, then should they put it in ASAP as a personal day and we'll change it? I think that's a good idea. So that way school can make sure that they have coverage and they know that you're going to be out. So I would say answer yes in that case. And
That's
then I
great.
will go in and change it.
So we'll have to put something out about that clarifies that.
Right.
And along those same lines, thank you, Deirdre. That's a great concern of mine. Along those same lines, as you said, Drew, people are just now starting to realize what their kids' lives are going to be like in terms of in local areas, whether they're going to be like cohort A, cohort B, and et cetera at other school districts. When they know that information, is it your impression then that people should send you that information as soon as possible in terms of like, I anticipate having to take FFCRA because on Mondays and Thursdays, my kid is on remote instruction in my home school district?
Yes, I anticipate putting a form on this same website that would streamline the reporting of that information.
Oh, so do you want us from the STA's perspective to tell people to hold off until you've got that so you don't get flooded with emails?
Yes, that would be great, but I hope to get that out today.
Okay, thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
And Drew, may I add something? You mentioned before, sorry, this is Rachel Mosley. You mentioned before that people will find out on Monday about cohorts. And I just want to make sure people don't expect that till the end of the day. No. I don't want people to think halfway into the day it hasn't something went wrong. It's end of the day.
Monday evening, the 31st?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for that clarification.
Thank
I didn't mean to let any cats out of the bag there.
No, that's okay.
Babs.
Joe actually asked sort of my question, by your answer, I think I know the answer. So I just want to double check that when your children's school is not officially closed, but they're in a cohort and cannot attend, are not welcome in the building the other 3 days of the week, we can use it. We can use the FFCRA leave for that.
Yes, your school is closed during those times to your child.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. I'm going to guess it's Denise, not Peter. Fama. Denise, am I right?
Yes, thank you. I can't change it for some reason. So my son had a Zoom with his school. So I just want to clarify for teaching assistants in the classroom, if there is a student who comes down with COVID and we are forced to, as a class, quarantine for 2 weeks, and then we all come back as a class, and then another child, I mean, hopefully this doesn't happen, but if another child comes down for some reason that we have to quarantine again, can you clarify the pay just one more time?
My assumption in your example is that you'd still be working. We will have assigned you to remote work.
Okay.
Unless you're sick, work during those 2 weeks, work would continue and you would just continue to get paid. You'd just be working remotely.
Perfect. Thank you.
No use of accruals there. Raquel.
Hi, Drew. Thank you so much. This is like really great information, and I know it's really complicated on your end of things. I just want to follow up one more time with what Joe said to make sure I'm getting it, because like other people, I've got babies screaming in the background half the time. So if it's easier for your office, if like we have a child in a remote situation where they're hybrid, 2 days a week or whatever, to sort of just call in sick those 2 days. Is that how I understood it? And then put in the notes like that this is due to school closure?
Yes, I'm going to say yes on that right now. But along with that would be you completing the survey I just described that doesn't exist yet to paint the picture for us so that we know we need to do a process with you as an employee.
But it wouldn't
But
necessarily.
We'll put clear instructions out about that.
Like you kind of do the survey, but
Yeah.
then call in sick so that it's not necessarily this FMLA,
Yeah,
because that's what we can do until December.
Right.
And
We will
then-
put that out. Yeah, oh, I see what you're saying. If you're just using your own sick accruals in lieu of triggering FMLA, yeah, but remember that would only cover 2 weeks.
Okay, that was what I was trying to figure out. So
Yes.
I could use, but 2 weeks total, 14 days?
10 days, 80 hours.
Okay. All right, I think I get it.
Right, so let me try to reframe that real succinctly. So the allowance of this as a reason to use your sick time is provided by federal law. And the federal law limits that reason to 80 hours, which is functionally 2 weeks. At that point, you would need to dip into FMLA.
Okay, so like if I am in a district that's planning on going full immersion in a month,
Right.
I could conceivably do this for the first month.
Correct.
Got it.
Good
Thank
question.
you.
I'm going to turn to Sharon D.
Hi, Drew. Hi, everybody. Just from an operational standpoint, how does this link up with the daily health screener? Is there a streamlined process? Like, does this link up with Frontline?
No, Sharon.
Okay.
No. This is
Okay.
going to have to be a, so the good news is this is just adults, right? So it's not the kids in this case, our students. But yes, if we're going to have to match up that daily health screener process with our absentee records, but they're not linked.
Okay.
Just by the way, we did research Frontline's version of the health screener, and even their systems aren't linked.
Okay. So that's helpful because are we getting the health screeners at the building level?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So you're going to have to cross-reference those, which is another level of fresh hell.
Great. Thanks.
Pat Frusciante. Pat, if you're talking, you're muted.
Pat's going to use my computer. One moment.
Okay. Thanks, Ani. And you have to unmute there, Pat.
Wonder I was doing it.
There you
I was
are.
doing it in the wrong place. I'm sorry. Can you just clarify your answer to Fran? We had a question yesterday. If we are in the building and we're exposed and we have to quarantine, but that happens more than one time, how do we get paid with that? You said the second go round we would go to sick bank. What sick bank are you talking about?
Let me back up. I mean, we would really need to get more specific. If you need to quarantine because a group of us need to quarantine, let's say, right? Let's say the high school administrative office has to quarantine. If you're well, you can work, you will be allowed to work remotely during that quarantine. So that's really the first answer, which is no disruption to your pay and no use of accruals whatsoever.
Okay.
Right? That's answer A. If the quarantine is kind of associated with illness, right? Then we're on that path of the first go round of the federal law. If there was then a second round, your 10 days are up from the federal law, and you can't work remotely for some reason, then we would use the instead of charging your accruals, I would imagine we would turn to the union and say, is this an appropriate use of the sick bank, which is a well-funded with accrual time to enable individuals without charge to their own accruals. That's what I imagine would happen.
Okay, thank you. Thank you
You're
for
welcome.
clarifying.
Thank you for asking for that clarification. I'm going to make sure I address people who haven't raised their hands yet. So I'm going to go to Jeffrey. And Elise, I'll come back to you if there's time.
Thanks again for doing this, Drew. My question was, what happens if I'm forced into quarantine because my children get forced into quarantine? I have a 6th grader and a 9th grader, and I'm assuming at some point they're going to get tagged to quarantine. I can still go remote, right? And it doesn't eat into any of my accruals?
That's our hope, yes. You know, that's our hope. The logistics, I'm not sure I've thought through that yet. But do you mean your own children or your students?
My own children. So
Yeah.
my children are in 6th grade and 9th grade, and if they get quarantined, I have to quarantine, right? And I just wanted to know that I could just go full virtual for my work and it wouldn't hit any of my accruals.
Yeah, I mean, that is what we hope to happen. Logistically, I can't describe to you exactly what that looks like, but it's so, you know, the students on in-school day would need to be supervised somehow, right? I just can't explain exactly how that would happen, but that's the plan.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, thanks. Christina.
Hi, Drew.
Hi.
I'm sorry if I missed this, if you addressed this. I've kind of been in and out. I noticed that it said FMLA can be used once every 12 months if we've
Yep.
already used that for a different reason. Are you saying we're not eligible for that in the fall if we have a child in a different district that has a different schedule?
Let's talk about that one individually if it comes up. I still need to do, I partially answered that and I partially said I need to do more research.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
So if you have a specific need, please reach out to me and we'll discuss it.
Will do. Thank you.
Thanks. Melissa.
Hi, Drew. Thanks for all of your information. My question is, if I was to take an intermittent leave, be it twice a week or whatever it happens to be, would I be providing the instructional materials for my students in my absence? Or if we had to take a 10 or 12-week leave, would it be a substitute coming in for us? I'm just trying to figure out what I would have to balance between the home and work life.
Good question. So in the former, if you were intermittent, it would be like you're out sick and you provide lesson plans because there'd be a substitute, a per diem substitute teacher. If you took the 12 weeks, we would hire a long-term sub or try desperately to find a long-term sub. And in that case, that sub would be responsible for the lesson plans.
Great, thank you.
We would hope you would help collaborate and keep the path, you know, straight and narrow there for the kids, but that's how it would work.
All right, great, thank you.
You're welcome. Carol.
I don't have any questions right now, but thank you for that was very informative.
Good. I'm glad it helped. Elise, you had your hand up. I can go back to you.
Melissa read my mind.
Okay. And Raquel, you had your hand up again too. Do you need a follow-up?
Yeah, Melissa, it was exactly what I was wondering, like about remote, like subs and stuff. And I know it's a big unknown for you right now. So it's just, that was the
Okay.
same question.
Great, thanks. Anne Marie.
Two things. Could you share that the attorney summary again in the chat with the chart, please?
Yep.
And so I just want to make sure that this applies to not just childcare, but if you need to care for a spouse or for elder care.
So the emergency sick leave does. The FMLA is not that, what you're describing is not a new expansion of FMLA. If you had to care for a loved one that is who's sick, that's covered under the regular FMLA.
Okay, so you wouldn't use FFCRA for like a parent, like your own parent who has to quarantine or is sick from COVID.
So so there are two different scenarios that you're describing. So you would be afforded emergency paid sick leave under the Federal Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act to care for someone who's under mandated quarantine or isolation or who's been required to quarantine. That's reason number 4.
Okay.
All right.
But it doesn't necessarily have to be a child.
No, does not have to be a child. If it was an illness, COVID or otherwise, you're eligible for that FMLA, regular old FMLA, and under your contract, you would be eligible to use personal leave and family leave bank time to continue to get paid during that FMLA.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep. Thank you.
Okay. Robin Cohen.
Hi. Actually, 2 questions. Joe just put one into the chat about caring for someone. Do they need to be in your household if it's like a parent, for example? And then the second question, you had mentioned you can do 1-hour increments as part of that intermittent leave. What if, like, my children are the AM cohort, so I'm available to work in the AM, but PM need to have I'm need childcare, so I'm with them. Are you able to take half days?
You are legally entitled to do that. It creates obviously challenges, but you are legally able to do that.
Okay. And the part about the parent not in the household?
I have to get back to you on that.
Okay. Thank you.
You're pushing my boundaries. I apologize. So the other Robin. And I'll take 2 more questions and then I really have to run. I apologize.
Hi, Joe. My question is, if an employee is opting to take intermittent leave after they've exhausted the 80 hours and they're going to go either to regular FMLA or the expanded FMLA, is that still, are they still eligible to take that expanded leave or regular FMLA in half-day or hourly increments, or no?
Your question is, can regular intermittent FMLA be used in smaller increments than a day?
Yeah, half days or hourly, similar to
Right.
the emergency.
Right.
act.
So if this is not COVID related, this is at the discretion of the employer.
Okay.
It has to.
But if it is COVID related, is it still?
If it is COVID related for child care, then you can take it in hourly increments.
Okay, thank
So
you.
let me just kind of zoom out for a second on that. The requirement of an employer to allow intermittent leave is really at the discretion of the employer. We do not have to allow it normally at all. The federal court ruled that we do under this case in the expansion. Okay, so the difference here is normally if a teacher or another employee said, I would like intermittent FMLA, we have the discretion of saying, no, that doesn't work for us. You can take regular FMLA and just go ahead, take your 12 weeks, you're entitled to that. But we normally have the discretion of saying, no, you can't do that. It is possible that the district court decision could be challenged and that the requirement that employers provide intermittent FMLA under this expansion could be stayed or overturned. What I'm describing to you is what the case is right now and how we're operating right now. Okay? I have another meeting I need to go to. If it's quick, I'll do Alyssa, Catherine, and Joy if they're real quick in that order. Alyssa?
Thank you so much. So just to clarify, are we able to use our crisis bank days if we are taking an FMLA leave? Are we able to use our 10 crisis bank days at the beginning in addition to our sick days, personal days, and then the FMLA? Would those occur concurrently, or to total, let's say, 18 weeks?
We should talk about that individually, but the short answer is no. Okay, did you hear me?
I couldn't hear it, sorry.
Okay. Joe has offered to answer some questions if I make him the host, and the meeting can continue. Joe, I would just ask that you, I'll have to end the recording because it's being recorded to my local machine. Okay. But I'll take.
Are you the host on the next meeting? Because you won't be able to, even a different host won't be able to continue if you're the host on the next one.
I'm sorry, Rachel, I don't understand. What?
Try it, but we might get disconnected when you're taking your next call. If next one you're the host.
I'm not the host on the next one.
Perfect.
Okay. So I've made Joe the host. Catherine, the sharer.
Hi. Yeah, I'm wondering if you need to be home for childcare, but you are able, like in my case, I'm a special, I would be able to teach remotely. Are you able to, like, how would that get handled?
If you're working, you're fulfilling your assignment, then there's no use of accruals or any emergency leave.
Okay. Thank you.
And last but not least, Joy.
Yes, so our accruals for the aides do not reflect any of this emergency sick pay or the FMLA leaves. So what do we need to do in order to use them? And when will we get them back into our accruals?
Joy, I don't understand your question.
So for example, I used an emergency paid sick leave in May. It came out of my sick bank, out of my sick days, not my bank. It hasn't been returned. We don't have a category for those.
It should have been returned.
I don't think it's been returned yet. And we don't have a category for asking them. So who would we go about if we needed to use?
You talk to your supervisor. So this is what I was explaining before. We had this in place in the spring. You talk to your supervisor.
Okay.
Your supervisor, you just put in the sick time, but your supervisor was supposed to fill out a survey, a form. It's on my website. You can see what the questions are. And then Deirdre would have returned that to you.
Okay.
So we will look into that. And if you want to connect with William and just check that out, you can.
Yeah, once I hear from William that I should do that, then I would return it to you.
No, Deirdre, it would just be in the survey.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Through
Okay.
the survey.
All
So
right.
we would talk to a supervisor if we need those days. Okay.
Yes. Thank you all. I apologize I have to go. Really good questions. I greatly appreciate it. Joe, thank you. It's a generous offer. I appreciate you staying on. And if you hear anything that's that you need to relay to me, you know where I am. Please reach out and let me know.
Will do.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Have a good weekend.